Psalms, the 11th Royal Psalm, Psalm 145. Now, it's just a 15-verse psalm, and it is in effect a prayer for David by David. In its wider application, it's a prayer of a Davidic king on his own behalf. That's correct. It is a prayer by the king for the king. The structure is quite simple. Well, if we go now to a PowerPoint display, we'll see two different versions of the structure of Psalm 144. Hang in there. We're going to get started today. We will end our work with the Royal Psalms next time. Hang in there. That's correct. It is a prayer by the king for the king. Now, the structure is quite simple. We'll take a look at it. Here we have a 6-point or 6-step psalm. The first 3 steps, A, B, and C, consisting of a short hymn of praise for Yahweh, the God of Israel. That occurs in the first 2 verses. Then we talk about, and the king identifies man as lowly in comparison with God and needy. That'll be in verses 3 and 4. Then the king will make a prayer for Yahweh's intervention. So it's praise, accepting the fact that creatures are below God, and then a prayer for intervention in verses 5 through 8. Now the A prime, B prime, C prime second half is very similar to the first half. A prime, a short hymn of praise for Yahweh again. B prime is a prayer for Yahweh's intervention again. Not always in the same way, but interventions nonetheless. And C prime, a prayer for Yahweh's blessing. And that is, of course, for Yahweh's blessing on Israel and its people. So there you have it, a very simple structure, 2 main segments of 3 pieces each, or 3 parts each, or 3 sections each, depending upon how you wish to call it. Well, here, before we go back, I changed my mind a bit. Here is a different looking structure for Psalm 144, consisting of 5 steps or 5 points or 5 segments. The first 2 verses talk about God's eternal greatness. It's a form of praise, of course. Step B, finite man's comparative insignificance, verses 3 and 4. And in verses 5 through 8, we have a description of God's power, God's omniscient. God is omniscient. And then in verses 9 and 10, we have man's praise of Yahweh, which is essentially, again, another statement of man's thoughts about God. And in the last 5 verses, 11 through 15, we have God's blessing, in particular, God's blessing on Israel, to wind up David's psalm here, Psalm number 144, the 11th and last royal psalm. Well, before we go on with Psalm 144, I'd like to go back to Psalm 132 to emphasize a point. It's a point we gave short shrift to, I think. At least it's interesting what we didn't discuss. And I'm referring to verse 9 of Psalm 132, and it goes something like this. This is when they were bringing the ark into Jerusalem. Let thy priests be clothed with righteousness, and let thy godly ones sing for joy. It's that singing for joy I want to discuss, because singing for joy wasn't all the revelry that was going on at that time. As we hinted at before, when the ark was delivered into Jerusalem, there was more than singing for joy. I want to back now into the Old Testament further to 2 Samuel 6. And I'm going to look at verses 13 through 16. And so it was that when the bearers of the ark of Yahweh had gone 6 paces, he, David, sacrificed an ox and a fatling. And David was dancing before the Lord with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. Linen ephod can be quite revealing, but we'll let it go at that. Verse 15, so David and all the house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouting and the sound of the trumpet. It was a gala event. Then it happened, as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Jerusalem of course, that Michal, the daughter of Saul, who was also a wife of David, Saul had given her to David for taking care of Goliath, for example. So that Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord. We have leaping, dancing, singing. Her response, and she despised him in her heart. But despising David for his singing and dancing wasn't enough. She had not yet spilled out her venom. We see that in chapter 6 of 2 Samuel, verses 20, 21, and 22. But when David returned, this is from setting up the ark in the tent that he had constructed. When David returned to bless his household, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, and you might notice the sarcasm that's dripping from her lips, how the king of Israel distinguished himself today. He uncovered himself. Remember the linen ephod? He uncovered himself today in the eyes of his servants' maids. In other words, he was doing this in front of some young women, as one of the foolish ones shamefully uncovers himself. David didn't let it go, folks. So David said to Michal, it was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore, I will celebrate before the Lord. And David didn't even stop there. He said, and I will be more lightly esteemed than this, and will be humble in my own eyes, but with the maids of whom you have spoken, with them I will be distinguished. Enough said. So let's look at Psalm 144 and go beyond that family feud. First, we're going to look at the opening brief prayer of praise for David's God, the God of Israel. Notice Psalm 44, verses 1 and 2. Blessed be Yahweh, my rock, who trains my hands for war. In other words, Yahweh is the one who made it possible for David to be a warrior king. And my fingers trains my fingers for battle. My loving kindness and my fortress, my stronghold and my deliverer, my shield, he in whom I take refuge, who subdues my people under me. Did you catch that list of characteristics and actions David gave in just 2 verses? He's speaking of Yahweh, my rock, my foundation, my steadfast loving kindness, my fortress, my protection, my stronghold, my deliverer, my rescuer, my savior, my shield, my protection, my refuge. Most of those, of course, are military terms describing a loving God who in kindness and grace is a divine warrior, protecting, delivering, and providing victory in battle for the Israeli king, in this case David. Just as a reminder, reconsider Psalm 18, our second royal psalm. Let me read verse 2 and 3 for you. And you recall that this psalm had essentially the same list. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield, the horn of my salvation. He is the one who is the strength of my salvation, my deliverance. He provides that strength for me. He is my stronghold. I call upon Yahweh, who is worthy to be praised, and I am saved, rescued, delivered from my enemies. So this is the second royal psalm in which we've seen that long list of military terms acknowledging it was Yahweh who provided all of those characteristics, actions, and traits on behalf of the Davidic king. David recognized that Yahweh provided his military support, his ability as a warrior, his protection from battle or in battle, and the victory over the battle. No wonder David wished to praise his God. He had all the proof he needed. Yes, all those characteristics and acts offered convincing proof that Yahweh was faithful to both the Mosaic covenant and the Davidic covenant. And here, of course, we are particularly interested in Yahweh's concern for the Davidic covenant. Now, scholars and translators have wrestled with verse 2 a bit. They differ somewhat on whether the reference should read my people or the peoples. If we go back there again a minute, said the last line of verse 2 says, who subdues my people under me. That's the NAS. Other translations, who subdues the peoples under me. Well, what's the difference? Well, there's quite a difference. My people refers to the people of Israel, of course, who have allegiance to David and for whom David must have allegiance and be their protector, guide, leader, and ruler. The peoples typically would refer to Gentiles, opposers of God, or the Gentile nations who are enemies of Israel. The dilemma stems from differences in manuscripts. Some reading Ami, my people, A-M-M-I, while other manuscripts read Amim, A-M-M-I-M. And if you're familiar with Hebrew at all, which I am very little familiar with, the I am in the ending instead of Ami being Amim means the plural. It usually refers to Gentile enemies or nations when used in the plural. Now back in Hosea, those who were with us back then, the Hebrew Ami was used a couple of different ways. One of them had lo, L-O, added in front of Ami, and the other did not. God calling Israel the northern kingdom, that remember he was ticked at the northern kingdom for their idolatry. Lo Ami means not my people, and he was calling Israel Lo Ami, not my people, before their Assyrian captivity in 726 or something like 722, somewhere in the early 700s, when Assyria took over the northern kingdom. But when God still said, you're not my people right now, he did foretell them that one day they would be called Ami, my people. So I said, right now, Lo Ami, not my people. But one day, Ami, my people, you will call me your God. We can see that in Hosea chapter 1, verses 9 and 10, where this usage occurred. And the Lord said, name him, your son, Hosea, name him Lo Ami, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. Speaking of the northern kingdom. Verse 10, yet the number of the sons of Israel will be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it will come about that in the place where it was said to them, you are Lo Ami, you are not my people, it will be said to them, you are the sons of the living God. You are Ami, you are my people. And if we drop down to chapter 2, verse 23, God added, and I will sow her, that's the northern kingdom Israel, I will sow her, scatter her, if you please, for myself in the land. I will have compassion. I will say to those who were Lo Ami, me, you are my people, and they will say, thou art my God. So, if the reference in our psalm is to the king's people, as given in the NAS, then Yahweh could well be described as the great Redeemer King of Israel. But if he's speaking of Amim, the peoples, Yahweh is being portrayed as Israel's divine warrior king. But of course, the God of Israel was and is both Redeemer King and Warrior King on behalf of his people. Well, let's go on to the next verses and man's comparative insignificance when held up beside God's nature and character. Let's look at verses 3 and 4. O Lord, what is man that thou dost take knowledge of him, or the Son of Man that thou dost think of him? Man is like a mere breath, his days are like a passing shadow. Pretty straightforward, right? God's eternal, man is not. God is holy, man is not. God is faithful and reliable, man is not. God is altogether worthy, man is not. God is stable, man is stable, man is not. One wonders why God condescends to care about man. But that too has a quick answer. God is love. Man was made by God for fellowship with God. So what's the key word out of those two verses? Grace. Grace. But what about verses 5 through 8, which will finish up the first half of Psalm 144? Let's read those. 5, 6, 7, and 8. Bow thy heavens, O Lord, and come down. Touch the mountains that they may smoke. Flash forth lightning and scatter them. I'm assuming that them is the enemies of David, the enemies of Israel, the enemies of God. Stretch out thine arrows and confuse them. Stretch forth thy hand from on high. Rescue me and deliver me out of great waters, out of the hands of aliens whose mouths speak deceit and whose right hand is a hand of falsehood. You get the impression that David was in a tough spot for some reason, and he realizes that only Yahweh can deliver him. He's not able, he's not strong enough in and of himself to do that. So he does the only thing left. He yells, "Help!" asking Yahweh to come down and to intervene on David's behalf. And this is an immediate call for help. David isn't saying when it's good and pleasing time for you, come on down. No, he's saying, Yahweh, I need help. I need it now. David's description of God's appearance recognizes that historically Yahweh's appearance was generally accompanied with so-called natural, they weren't of course, disturbances of cosmic proportions. That was the case at Sinai during wilderness wanderings. Let's look at that for a moment. I'm looking at Exodus 19, verses 18, 19, and 20. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked violently. You think that'd get your attention if you were there? Verse 19, when the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke and answered him with thunder. And the Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain. I'm not sure most of us would have been up to going up to all of that, but it says, and Moses went up. Moses did not or was not afraid of God. Did he have a fear of God? Certainly. He respected and was in awe of God. And again, as we saw earlier in Psalm 18, when the king was being delivered, it was described this way. Psalm 18 has a lot of parallels with 144. I'm looking at verses 13 and 14 in Psalm 18. The Lord also thundered in the heavens, and the Most High uttered his voice. Hailstones and coals of fire from his voice. And he sent out his arrows, that's probably lightning, and scattered them. And we see that now in the second half of verse 14. And lightning flashes in abundance, and he routed them. These kinds of images were the fare of most of the prophets too. They spoke like that when they were speaking of Yahweh's presence. Here, as in other Psalms, David is facing an enemy who can overwhelm him. That's what the mighty waters are about. And his troops. So, what was David's request? For the enemies, he's saying to Lord, scatter them, confuse them, rout them, show vengeance and retribution. For himself, what's he asking? Rescue me, deliver me, vindicate me. And as David was wont to do, he described the despicable nature of his enemies. He didn't say, as he has in one spot, break their teeth, but he does say they're full of deceit, they are purveyors of lies. You, Lord, you don't want any part of them. Take them out for me, please. That'll help you too. David's enemies generally opposed the gods of Israel, the God of Israel. They represented unfaithfulness, intimidation, treachery, and perfidious behavior. I'll let you worry about the meaning of perfidious. Just before we close, I want to give a side note a minute. I'm not sure that it has anything directly to do with this, although it seems related. There was a Canaanite god known as Yam, Y-A-M-M. Now, Yam caused upheaval in the world of Canaanite gods. He controlled the mighty waters, so if he didn't control them, there was confusion, there was upheaval in the world of the gods themselves. So much so that the lead god, who, by the way, the lead god's name was Baal, B-A-A-L. And Baal eventually subdued Yam among the fight among the Canaanite gods, just so you know. So in this first half of Psalm 144, our Davidic king warrior has requested the aid of the great warrior king of Israel. Now next time we're going to see man's praise of Yahweh. We'll see David's praise of Yahweh and Yahweh's response in blessing, a blessing-filled, graceful response to David's praise. We'll see you then.